I'd like to call to order the special session of the Clive City Council at 5:15 on April the 11th. Will the clerk please call roll?
Mayor Edwards,
Here.
council members Klein,
Here.
McCoy,
Here.
Judkins, Weaver,
Here.
McElhenney.
Here. Thank you. The only item on our agenda is a public hearing on our proposed property tax levy. Did we publish the appropriate public notice?
Yes, it was published in the Des Moines Register on March 27th, 2024.
Thank you. Matt?
Thank you, Your Honor. Tonight we have a proposed property taxation hearing. This is a part of the new state legislation related to the property tax laws in the state of Iowa. And this is separate from a normal budget public hearing that will come later in the month. You'll have an action on your regular council meeting a little later tonight to set that public hearing for your regular budget adoption. This is a new form of public engagement included in that legislation related specifically to property taxation. And this is follow up to the letters that were sent out to every property taxpayer in the community here back in March. Your Honor, I'm going to dive in, just provide a little bit of staff background on the proposed property taxation for this coming fiscal year. And if there's any, then following that, any comments from the public from there. So with the truth and taxation letters that were mailed out in March, what they saw for the city of Clive is a reduction of 22 cents on the levy from 1014 to 992. This is taking into account the reduction in the taxable valuation as forced by the property tax law, and then additional reduction that this council is considering in terms of the property tax rate. On that same letter, taxpayers would have also received what the counties and the school districts are looking at for property taxation in the next year. Based on the information that we have, Polk County is not looking at any change in their countywide levy. So the countywide levy is what's applicable to city taxpayers. The rural levy is only to taxpayers in Polk County that live outside of a city. On the Dallas County side, for Dallas County, they're looking at a 62-cent increase to their countywide levy. So that would be impacting Clive ratepayers in the Dallas County portion of Clive. West Des Moines Schools is looking at a 92-cent decrease in their levy. So that their decrease coupled with our decrease as well is over $1 in that levy rate for Clive residents who live in the Polk County West Des Moines school portion of Clive. And then Waukee Schools had no change in their levy. So this was all shown on those letters of the different taxing entities that were mailed out. In terms of property taxation, in terms of the council's priorities, again, keeping property taxes fair and predictable, maintaining adequate cash reserves. We had a lot of conversation about that during the budget workshops in February in terms of where our current cash reserves are at. For the last 8 years, Clive has kept its property tax rate at 1014, and this would be the first change in 8 years to that rate and a change down. So with the proposal of going down to 992. For a typical household, this results in a decrease in the taxes or basically the cost to the taxpayer. So I know there's been a lot of talk about assessed valuations going up 20% and thinking that taxes are going up 20%. Well, there's mechanisms in the state property tax law for that not to happen. And so the reduction in the rate coupled with the reduction in the residential rollback, so the percentage of your home that is available for taxation going down from 54% to 46%, coupled with the property tax levy reduction, results in the decrease that Clive taxpayers will be seeing for Clive city taxes. I can't speak to that for county taxes and school taxes, but for city taxes, that would be the change. The net, in terms of the cost to the taxpayer, which we'll talk about in a little bit, we have some increases that we'll be talking about related to utility rates. That will be some increases. So coupled with that, the net is what you see on the screen here is $264 decrease for the total year. And then for a business, a slight increase, and most of that is driven by those utility rate changes that you see that at least is proposed, that staff is proposing, and we'll be talking about in your regular meeting later tonight. In terms of how our rate stacks up to other communities, you can see of what we knew in mid-March. We don't know if there's been any changes since then, but what we knew in mid-March for these other communities, this is where Clive would fall with the proposed rate to $9.92. This is what I alluded to earlier. This shows kind of the breakdown. Council's very familiar with this in terms of the property tax portion, utility fee portion of the total cost of Clive services to our taxpayers and ratepayers. And then you see the decrease on the business side, and then the pretty much status quo on the business side. And that's mainly driven by the utility rates changes. In terms of percentage of that tax dollar that goes to the city of Clive, it's roughly around 30%, with the vast majority going to the two school districts, Waukee a little bit higher than the West Des Moines School District. But this shows you the breakdown. Again, a lot of times there's a number of taxing entities. The city of Clive is one of those property taxing entities that taxpayers will see on their bill. So some key goals from the council. This comes out of your strategic plan that informs everything we do in terms of the proposed budget and proposed capital improvements program. These will look very familiar, but these are the four kind of key 5-year goals that we've been working towards, and that this, again, budget, both operational and capital budget, represents. In terms of some specific priorities on action items, we have a number of them on the screen here that the council is familiar with. But in terms of some that I'll speak to that directly relate to this operational budget, that's primarily funded by property tax. There is the expansion of the hours at the Harbach Center, looking to add more days to provide programming at that facility. Of course, enhanced communications, we're looking at adding some other methods like the texting service to our plethora of communications to our community. Our just regular staff recruitment and retention strategies, with pay increases being a portion of that. Flood mitigation, which we'll talk a little bit about those activities later tonight during the regular meeting. Park redevelopment, such as Lanand Park and others. Stream restoration along Walnut Creek and its tributaries. So these are a lot of the kinds of both operational and capital projects that are funded by property tax and are represented here in your strategic priorities. In terms of the breakdown of the operating budget versus the capital budget, we roughly have, $90 million budget, a little over 90 million. And what you see here is kind of the changes from one year to the next. The capital budget can very much fluctuate just depending on timing of when those projects hit in a certain fiscal year. Sometimes we're budgeted for it in a previous fiscal year, and some of those costs carry over, so that will shift. The capital budget will vary quite a bit from year to year. The operational budget is a little bit more on a linear line that you see in terms of its changes from year to year. Specifically for the general fund, which is primarily has property tax as one of its major funding sources, you see the breakdown here of where the percentages in terms of the service delivery side of the general fund. Property taxes makes up about 60% of the revenue, and the services that you see here, primarily the public safety and culture recreation. Again, these are top priorities that are identified in your strategic plan, as well as top priorities that have been identified in citizen surveys over the past few years, again, are primarily funded by the general fund. Of the general fund, of the 992 that is proposed, the general fund tax levy, since the city has 3 different tax levies, the general fund levy, the trust and agency levy that primarily funds benefits and insurances, and then the debt service levy of $1.48. The general fund levy makes up $7.01 of that 992. So the vast majority of that overall city of Clive levy rate. FY 24-25 capital investments, a big year for capital investments, as you can see here on the screen. Of course, streets being the largest of that 38 million, and spread out through a variety of other areas. Again, I talked a little bit earlier about those strategic priorities, and roadway reinvestment is a big one, not necessarily primarily funded by property tax. It's funded by a number of other sources, but some of it, like Alice's road reconstruction and some others, are funded by property tax. And Your Honor, that is what I have for you, and ready to accept any feedback from the public on this proposed budget.
Very good. Anything from the council before we move to the public? Is there any? Go ahead, Eric.
Matt, what's the difference on West Des Moines and Waukee school districts? Is it, how's that, how are those funding formulas put together to make up the difference?
Primarily driven by the state funding formula. So a lot of what you're seeing with the West Des Moines rate going down is pretty much a direct result of some funding shortfalls that they're receiving from the state. So that drives their rate down. So that is, a lot of it is predicated for them on their state funding. That drives that rate.
Is there anyone in the chamber who would like to address us on the property tax levy? If so, please come forward, identify yourself for our record. Art?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I wrote this down because, as many of you know, sometimes I get the bell before my time is up. And I'm Art Whitmack, 14265 Elmcrest Court, on the Dallas County side in the Waukee School District. In addition to being a taxpayer, I currently wear the hat of president of the Taxpayers Association of Central Iowa. The association was founded in 1921, and it is an independent, nonpartisan, and that's hard to be these days, organization that encourages efficient, effective, and transparent local property or local public sector organizations. We do so as an association because public sector organizations are necessary in supporting safe, vibrant, and just communities in Central Iowa. However, the ability to pay for services is not unlimited. In that regard, the work you have done in Clive is exemplary. Property taxes are the least liked, most confusing, and deemed to be the least fair of all the taxes we pay. Of all the taxes paid by an individual in the state of Iowa, property taxes are the largest. They account for almost 39 to 40% of an individual's tax bill annually. Personal income taxes about 24%, and sales taxes about 19%. Feeling increased pressure from constituents, the Iowa legislature a couple of years ago passed Senate File 634, and it required, if there was so much as $1 increase in property taxes collected, it was the first time a special forum such as this was required by law. It additionally had a provision that if taxes collected exceeded 2%, it required a supermajority of the council, the supervisors, or the school board to pass it. This is all familiar to you, and I simply say it for purposes of disclosing what I've shared uniformly with the other 7 organizations in front of whom I've appeared. A year ago, House File 718 was passed by the legislature with only 1 dissenting vote. I mentioned that in one forum, and I was reminded that the opposition only had 24 hours to review the bill. Nevertheless, when it came down, it was as close to total bipartisanship as we've had in the state. The county auditors were required to send out the document that we all received. It was to, quote, provide a large amount of information aimed at educating taxpayers about the forthcoming budget. Unfortunately, the notices on the second page included a demonstration of what the tax implications were for a house of $100,000 taxable valuation that maintained $100,000 in year 1 and year 2. In Clive, when I got it, I wanted to call all of you and thank you for the reduction by 16.97% in my property taxes collected. And indeed, it's still going to be magnificent reduction on a parcel that I looked at of 7.5%. That is commendable. Matt and I were talking about one of the other forums I attended out in Dallas County. The uninformed individual would have looked at that $100,000 house and saw an increase of I put down 2.24, I think it was 2.49% in their property tax bill. But when you took it to a specific property in the county, that increase was 13 to 14%. And that's why the chamber was standing room only, and it was not pleasant. Polk County showed a decrease of 15.14 on that example. And indeed, it will be on the basic, on a specific house where we did the research, an increase of 3.57%. So unfortunately, the information I think that the Department of Management, under the direction of the legislature, provided has in many communities provided misinformation. And what we are about as an association, our sense is that the legislature is not going to, and there are people better versed to discuss that presently than I don't think there are going to be major changes in any property tax bill at this point. I do think, however, between this point and next year, there should be some technical changes made to the report that we all received. So to that regard, I would enlist all who are either listening or present, and those of you on the council and the staff, to join us in that dialogue. We need to have, it's a worthy discussion. We need to have worthy opinions, facts to support whatever it is that we would like to change. So we look forward to your thoughts, your suggestions, and your input. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Art. Just under 5 minutes. Very good. Anyone else in the chamber who'd like to address us on the matter?
Move to close public hearing.
Second. Motion is second to close public hearing. Pete, do we have anyone online?
No, Your Honor.
We have a motion and a second to close the public hearing. Further discussion? Seeing none, would the council please vote? And will the clerk please post that vote?
Yes.
That passes by a vote of 5-0. Is there anything else, any further we need to do?
So the only thing I would mention, Your Honor, for anybody in the audience, we do also have this 4-pager, I think that Liz was handing out, that does some of the similar graphs that you saw in my presentation is included in this handout. Good information. We also have a ton of information on the city's website. If you want to dig deeper into our proposed budget that the council will be considering later this month. That's all I have, Your Honor.
Thank you. Anything from members of the council? Otherwise, we'll adjourn at 5:33.